Welcome to Short and to the Point, a podcast from the Comeback in Awful Announcing. Here's your host, Jessica Kleinschmidt.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Short and to the Point on the Comeback and Awful Announcing. Jess Kleinschmidt here. A fun episode ahead of us because I was a little bit out of my comfort zone when it came to this. I've always been so intrigued by horse racing and betting in that atmosphere, but especially the Kentucky Derby, because when I'm watching it from an outsider perspective, seeing people decked out in their great garb, the hats, Rob Gronkowski and Tom Brady just getting absolutely faded, watching it go down and placing bets on these horses. And that's something that I've always enjoyed, but I never got into the nitty gritty of it. So there was no better guest than Mike Joyce of FanDuel TV to join me today, because not only does he place his own bets and he loves the sport itself, but he has a long background in betting. And it goes back to the time he was 11 and 12, working in Wyoming Downs with his father, doing every aspect of the job, even shoveling manure. Somebody's got to do it. So I just loved the passion that he had about this. And you can always manage to watch a guy or a girl when they're passionate about something and they're an analyst. That's somebody you're going to want to pay attention to. FanDuel TV will have wall-to-wall coverage leading up to the big race. So without further ado, here is my chat with Mike Joyce. All right, Mike, thanks for joining me today. This is your first time on Short and to the Point, and I just appreciate your time. I have so much I want to pick your brain about.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm really excited about this. Let's do it.
Me as well. So it's really cool to hear your background. You loved racing from a young age, and it started with, working at the Wyoming Downs when you were 12, and you did everything. You were even like shoveling manure. You were doing all kinds of stuff. So tell me about your introduction into this racing world.
So, I always say it's more of like a failure to launch kind of situation than like, I'm driven by my passion. I was always at the track. So my dad was a very well-known racing executive in my youth in Chicago. And I was at the racetrack. I was at Arlington Park every day as a kid. And when I was about 11, 12 years old, my dad had sold his interest in Arlington, and he just for giggles went out to Wyoming and ran a racetrack that had been foreclosed on by a bank. And they were like, hey, come on. He just thought it would be something fun to do. And then he loved it. And he just bought the place. He's like, I'm going to do it. He lived in New York his whole life. And at age 60 something, he decides I'm going to go play cowboy in Wyoming. So we moved, and I started, he broke all kinds of child labor laws to employ me. The first job I had, I think it was 11, 12, and I was running the strip photos. They used to have a photo that was a strip for the quarter horse races. And I would run those from the photo finish booth down to the steward so they could do the order of finish and make it official. And then all the way down to the operations office and tape it on a piece of glass for everyone to look at. So it was something like 10 flights of stairs up and down, and he would pay me $5 a night. So it's $5 for the whole day. And I'm like, this is great. I thought I was rolling. And I did every job at the track you could possibly do, and I worked my way up. So I did shovel manure in the paddock in between races. I valet parked cars. I restocked the condiment station for the concessions. And they referred to me as Captain Condiment, which is a moniker I wore proudly.
Yeah.
To the point where by the time I was in my late teens, early 20s, I was working in the racing office. So that's really where you get into, the nuts and bolts of creating a race card. So, writing the conditions of the races, taking entries, putting everything together. It's the most thankless job in racing, but the most important job in racing is being a racing secretary. And I worked for a racing secretary named Fred Davis, who taught me a lot. And it's really where all the action is. Like, that's where everything happens. That's where every day's race card comes together. That's where everything's put together. And that's really when you assemble the product that goes out to the wagering public for them to consume. So it was really cool.
Well, and that's interesting because it also sounds like you were obviously exposed to racing early on and you had that understanding. So what was that process like? Because I feel like there's obviously a stretch when it comes to the shoveling of the manure, the race strip, and then now you're an analyst and you kind of have a love for it. So what was that transition from being behind the scenes to being the go-to guy when people want to place bets?
So for me, it was, now it's FanDuel, but it was TVG back when I started 23 years ago now, 22 years ago.
So you started at 4 years old.
Yeah. Well, exactly. I'm happy to say that I'm 46 and a half years old. I'll let you know my birthday so you can send me flowers. The process, but when I started at TVG, I started as a production assistant, and I moved to Los Angeles making $20,800 a year,
Mhm.
and that was in 2001. And I like to gamble. I like to play the horses. I knew a little bit about it, obviously from my background. And those first few years when I was making nothing, I'm not exaggerating. There were a couple of months where, if I didn't hit a pick 4 on the 31st, I wasn't paying rent on the 1st. Right. So there was a horse named Tiz a Tiger. I'll never forget, because I singled him in a pick 4 at Los Alamitos one night that paid like $2,000. My rent was $925 a month. My paycheck was $314 a week. So there's not a lot of give in there for things like food, gas, utilities, etc. And I remember if I didn't hit that pick 4, I wasn't paying rent.
Yeah.
And it was something like, it was like rent was overdue on the 9th. And this was like on the 8th. It's like I needed that cash. I needed to run to the bank the next day and deposit it and send the check off to the landlord. Like it was like, so I've always, been a fan of the game. I've always loved playing, and really it was just, working my way up like anybody. I think anybody in television, I'm sure your experience is the same. You start at the bottom and you start kind of scratching and clawing. You work a lot of days for free. You do a lot of jobs for free. You take on more responsibility, and then you're just waiting to get lucky. And then there's that day where, somebody doesn't show up for work and they're like, hey, do you got a tie? We need someone on the air. You're like, all right, I'm ready to go. And then you just try not to fumble the ball. And that's basically how I kind of got to that point. And I started as an analyst. I'm more of a host now, but really all of us on air at FanDuel TV, most of us are jacks of all trades, right? We can host, be analysts, reporters. I fall a little bit short on the social side. I think it's because of an age thing. Like at 46, like you just don't have the energy to be, tweeting and you see all the announcements, whatever. But like that, other than that, I think, in the broadcast side, most of us can do at least 2 of the 3 jobs. So, but I'm primarily a host. My analysis, I'm confident in my handicapping, but I'm also very well aware that the people I work with, some of them are just ridiculously good and they have such good information. So I never fancy myself as being an equal handicapper to a Matt Carruthers or a Matt Bernier or, Christina or Simon or some of the real good analysts that we have. My strength's probably more hosting, but we know the game. We all play. We're all avid fans and dedicated horse players. So I'm confident in that. But I also know who the real good ones are that I work with. I know who the ones who are they're diving a lot deeper than I am, and they have a real good perspective. And it's a lot like baseball. There's a lot of similarities between horse racing and baseball, and there is more crossover with baseball than any other sport from horse racing, in that there is just such a massive amount of information and there is so much to learn. You're never going to know it all. And what really makes it's like doing the crossword, right? It's just a mental challenge. Handicapping the races every day is such a mental challenge. And if you're not learning something new, then you have to really reassess how you're looking at things, because there's always more to learn.
And I love that. And it's funny you mentioned, though, like with the rent situation. So you've been sweating this stuff from the beginning. Like you had that edge already.
Yeah,
that's sure. Really that's cool.
Yeah. And, a lot of my colleagues started the same way I did. And they were in that same situation when they were younger, where they're trying to, you're hustling jobs, or you're like, but you get, you get into a position where it's like, all right, I gotta, I'm either going to hit this pick 4 or I got to call mom. It's like when you're like 24, 25, you're like, I really don't want to call mom and say, Mom, I can't make rent. So we've all kind of been there. But, now I think the way, the difference, and I don't really know, because sports betting is not as much my forte. Like I'll do it occasionally, but there's no sports betting in California. I don't have an account, obviously to wager out here. So it's like when I go to Vegas or I'm in a state where I can. But for me, like the difference between sports betting and horse racing is that sports bettors, everyone feels like they know the sport they're watching, and they're going to have an educated opinion in their own mind, enough to have that confidence. Like, hey, like, I know this, I watched, this, I'm going to bet this. With horse racing, I feel like there's just these dedicated horse players that they may play every day or they may play every weekend, but it's the pursuit that really makes the game so attractive, right? You have to enjoy doing the homework. You have to enjoy sitting down with the racing form and poring over it and watching replays. And it's just an immersive world. It really is an intellectual endeavor in a lot of respects. And the banter at the racetrack is unlike anywhere else in the world. And I would like to think that what we do on the air at FanDuel TV brings that banter into people's homes, right? Like the idea in the original, formation of it is we had hosts that were from a television background and analysts from a horse racing background. So you were matching people that didn't know racing with people who did know racing to try and make it more familiar for the newcomers. And now that FanDuel has, become the go-to brand for all our wagering, that conversation's changed just a little bit, where now we have the sports bettors who are tuning in, the sports bettors who are, opening accounts with FanDuel and whatnot, that we're trying to bring into that conversation in horse racing so they can understand it. And I think the thing that will really ultimately be the selling point for horse racing is all gamblers, no matter what you're doing, are price sensitive. And when you're looking at the prices that you can get in horse racing, there's just no comparison. Where in sports betting, you're sweating out like a minus 150 favorite or a minus 180 favorite. In horse racing, you have favorites that are plus 250, plus 300, in that range. Your return is a minute and a half versus sweating out a 2.5 hour baseball game or a 3 hour football game. The pools, the exotic wagers that are there, there are people who daily, there is evidence of people turning, 2-digit, 3-digit wagers into 4-digit, 5-digit payouts, right?
Yeah.
When you look at the pick 5 at the end of the day at Keeneland and it pays $51,000, right? And that's on a 50-cent base wager. They didn't bet only 50 cents. There's in multiple combinations, but the person who made that 50 grand, that might've been a $200 ticket or a $300 ticket or something in that range. There's nothing like that in sports. You'd have to hit a ridiculous parlay. And, and horse racing's hard. I mean, I can count on one hand the number of horse players I know that can make a living at it without having other sources of income. For the most part, we do it recreationally, knowing that we're going to have good days and bad days, knowing we're going to have good years and bad years. But it's the pursuit. Like that's really the thing that you can never duplicate in anything else. That pursuit of constantly trying to figure out, okay, how are things going to unfold today? What are we looking at this year in the Derby? Who's going to be, who's going to have that year? Who's going to have that weekend? Who's going to really float to the top? That's what keeps people coming back.
And you had this really cool quote that I read from you. You said, if you have to ask why, then you'll never understand. And I think that had a lot to do with just horse racing and the fandom of it all. So is there this unique, I don't want to say fraternity because it seems so male adjacent, but is there this unique club that you really can't define it because unless you're enthralled in it, it's hard to explain?
So I'd put it to you this way. It's a club that accepts all members, right? Because the racetrack is the last refuge for anybody. I mean, the characters at the track are, Damon Runyon-esque and unlike anywhere you ever see, but there's no one is turned away from the racetrack. And you see all colors. The thing about the racetrack that I will never find anywhere else. And I say this all the time. When you walk into the racetrack, if you're really in that world, when you walk into the racetrack, you never know what you're going to see that day. There is a world of possibility that day that doesn't exist anywhere else. You could see the next Derby winner. You could see the next superstar. You could see, tragedy and injury and it is the most dangerous sport. The jockeys are chased around the racetrack by an ambulance, right? Like you can see somebody in the stands become a millionaire. You can see, there's just nothing like that. I remember, there's a day at Hollywood Park back in the day, and Hollywood's been closed for over 10 years now. When you I walked into the track on a Wednesday thinking, ho hum, nothing's going to happen today. Somebody punched a quick pick, $2 pick 6 ticket on like one of the far end self-serve terminals. Guy was probably, impoverished, probably had, very little money to his name, and it hit for like 86 grand. It was just a $2 quick pick, boom, and the guy's walking out with $86,000 that probably solved a slew of problems in his life. And you just don't get that anywhere else. Nobody walks into a casino with $2 and walks out with 86 grand, right? But that happened. It's very rare, but that happened. And yeah, it is a little bit of a fraternity. It's a sorority as well. I mean, one of our best analysts, Christina Blacker, forgotten more about horse racing than I'll ever know. And it's a community that is tight knit because it's not very large, but it's very accepting. People come into that community from everywhere, and the background it's so diverse. It's literally from, you know, until she passed this past year, the Queen of England, right, down to, you know, like the, you know, $2 better on general admission who, you know, like is living, you know, in the most modest means necessary, and they're all in the same place.
Yeah.
You just don't get that, right? You know, it was like one of the great, you know, like things was Bobby Frankel training for Juddmonte, right? Like Juddmonte was owned by a prince of the royal family of Saudi Arabia. Bobby Frankel was some Jewish kid from Brooklyn who but like the racing would bring those two people together, right? And this was one of the most powerful racing operations with one of the greatest. A lot of people think Bobby Frankel is the greatest trainer of all time. Nothing but the horse could have brought those two people together. You know? And they both passed on, but they were, you know, very tight. I don't want to say they were the best of friends, but they were very close friends and very close business partners. And they won a lot of great races together. And it's that, you know, that pursuit of glory on the racetrack, to the people involved, there's nothing in the world like it. And there is nothing that could ever replace it.
And I think that that's what's cool is just me. Like, it's not a place I would find myself, but I've never been intimidated by it. Like I feel like tomorrow, if I got a ticket, I would just up and go. And I feel like that I can feel the acceptance, and it feels like there's an experience there too. It's obviously not just about putting money on, that's obviously imperative, but the whole experience of it all too. And like, I'm a sucker for fashion. I love to see what people are wearing and the celebrities that are there. And that's always kind of fun too. And then the competitive nature to it, it's all the aspects you could ever really want in an event.
Well, the Kentucky Derby is, I mean, it's about a fat a slice of Americana as you can get. And it is, you know, in America, like we like to say, you know, our championships are world championships, right? Like it's like the World Series. It's, you know, the NBA Finals are the World Championships. We think it's the, you know, even though there's sport going on around the world, the Kentucky Derby is the biggest race in the world. Frankie Dettori is a Hall of Fame jockey. He's Italian. He's rode most of his career in Europe. He retired last year, except for he didn't retire because even after retirement, he spent the last 2 years, the last 2 winters in California riding in Santa Anita, because he's won every race in the world. He's the most successful jockey that Europe has ever seen by some respects. Never won a Kentucky Derby. And that race is still, it doesn't matter how many championship races he won at Ascot. It doesn't matter how many, you know, Dubai World Cups or whatever, all of that stuff, even races that are worth, you know, 5-10 times the amount of money that the Kentucky Derby is. I mean, this is a guy who's, you know, in his 50s who really should be enjoying the life that he has built for himself outside of racing. But it's that glory on that first Saturday in May is something that nobody with any inkling of a chance wouldn't pursue to the utmost. So it's like, yeah, I retired. I kind of didn't retire. Maybe I'll retire next year. Like, it's one of those things. So the allure is truly unparalleled.
Yeah. And I get Mike Trout vibes with that. But when it comes to this particular Derby, you know, what are the latest odds, predictions, and are there any surprising fades coming into the race?
So here's the thing with the Derby is that, you know, it's the greatest racing event, one of the greatest sporting events in the world, without a doubt. The race itself, like if you look at it from a racing perspective, is a really tough race for a lot of reasons that in the racing world, it's befuddling. It's actually not a great race in that respect. So like the Breeders' Cup Classic at the end of the year, which is like that's like the actual Super Bowl where the greatest, you know, horses match up, right? In the Breeders' Cup. The Derby is more akin to the NCAA tournament where it's this great spectacle and it's giving us a glimpse of what's to come. It's kind of the coming out party because they're, you know, it's all 3-year-olds. It's the most important race in the world. So there's, you know, 17,000 foals or 17,000 horses born a year, right? 20 of those make the Kentucky Derby. Wow. When they're born, all 17,000 are pointed toward the Derby, right?
Yeah.
Like that's the hope. So through that process of getting there, there's nothing bigger and nothing more important than it. But we are still looking at slightly unfinished products, right? These are horses that they have to be at their best on the first Saturday in May, but the best they'll ever be for a number of them is actually in front of them, right? It's what's to come. This is kind of that first jump into, okay, this is, you know, this horse wants to be the Jefe of this crop. So this year, these 3-year-olds, there's a very large line of demarcation between Fierceness, who is the champion 2-year-old from last year. He's the number one prospect. He'll be the favorite in the Derby. And then down a step to everybody else. I think after Fierceness, the race opens up a bit. I think if Fierceness runs the race that he's fully capable of, if he runs his best race, I don't think there's any question that he's just far better than these. And the trouble is not how good they are. It's how good are they going to be on the first Saturday in May. So when you're handicapping, two of the most basic questions you're asking is, what are they capable of? And then what are they actually going to do on race day? Because those two aren't always the same, right? They might be capable of this, but on race day, they come in here. Fierceness has run 5 times. 3 of those races, he was absolutely sublime. 2 of them, he got beat. And he didn't look great. Looked okay. There was, an excuse in his second to last race. It was his first race of the year. He's coming off a layoff. He didn't have a great break. He, started in a suboptimal fashion, and he was playing catch up and just kind of flattened out and finished 3rd. Florida Derby, his next start, he got to the lead and he ran a hole through the wind. He was just gone. He runs that race. See you later. And I don't think there's a ton of speed to go with him. Now, when you have a horse who wants to be on the lead throughout the entire race, they want to get the lead early. One of the most compromising factors for that are other horses that want to do the same thing. Yeah. Because when they go too fast early, clearly they're not going to finish as well. And that sets it up for horses to come flying from off the pace. I don't know that that's necessarily going to come into play. Sure, there are other horses that have speed, but I think Fierceness might just be faster than them anyway. So it might not matter that they go with them. If he runs his race, I really do think he's just far better than these. Nobody in this field can run close to what he did in the Florida Derby, which was his last race before the Kentucky Derby. Now, once we get past that, things open up a little bit. Sierra Leone, really nice horse for Chad Brown. He ran a very nice race in the Toyota Bluegrass from off the pace on a track. Sometimes the surface favors a running style over another. I don't know if that surface was as speed favoring that day as perhaps it was made to sound, but it certainly wasn't favoring a horse of his style, which is from way off the pace. And he came way out of it, closed late, ran a fantastic effort that day. He's clearly the second best. I think come Derby Day, the odds on Fierceness will be about 5-2 or 2.5-1, plus 250, maybe 3-1. And I think Sierra Leone will probably be 5-1, maybe 6-1. And at those, if those are the odds, I'm tempted to just make Fierceness my top pick and bet him in that event and try not to overthink it.
Right.
But Sierra Leone he's a very, very nice horse. He's in a lot of other years, in a year without a Fierceness, he'd be a formidable favorite. But you also have to deal with in the Kentucky Derby, it's a very large field. 20 horses run in the Derby. Yeah. Most races don't have 20 horses. Usually in a horse race, they'll cap it at 14. But the Derby being the Derby, you got to make it 20 to make it so everybody who has a close to a chance can get in. And it's also, it creates, the dynamic of a race that you just don't see anywhere else. Kind of adds to the mystique. It adds to the celebration of the sport. But a 20-horse field, traffic is an issue, just like, heading over the Bay Bridge, right? You're not going to get in front of somebody. So a horse that has speed like Fierceness is in a better position because they don't have to pass anyone. A horse like Sierra Leone,
he's a bigger dude too, right? And he has to deal with, maybe he's more successful when there's more clear.
Right. And and Sierra Leone, he's very good. But when you're 15th in a field of 20 and you got to get by 14 horses, they're not just all going to go to the, go into the slow lane so you can pass, right? They're trying to run their race and get there too. So there's a lot of traffic to weave in and out. So horses like that, dead closers like that, are very rare. That's why Rich Strike, who won the Derby at astronomical odds a couple of years ago, and if you go back and you watch his Derby and the ride that Sonny Leone put on him, it was brilliant. It was a Hall of Fame ride, and he had to make several moves, right? He had to make 4 or 5 decisions going in, going out, going through this horse, and they all worked, which is almost as much of a miracle as the horse winning in the first place at such large odds, drawing in off the also eligible. Every single one of those moves worked. That doesn't happen very often. Usually, if you have to make multiple decisions on a lane in a 20-horse field, chances are one of those isn't going to work out. So when you have a horse with that running style, it can be really, really tough. But like Sierra Leone's very good. Track Phantom is very good. I think a horse like Just Steel is going under the radar because he's raced a lot. But his trainer, Dwayne Lucas, has won multiple derbies. He's 87 now, I believe, but he's still, one of the greatest horsemen of all time. I think a horse, I'm forgetting the name. I should really have my form in front of me right now. The horse that was second to Sierra Leone in the Bluegrass for Just a Touch for Brad Cox. He's another one. And a horse like Just a Touch, he's very interesting because he's so lightly raced. He's done something new. He's only made 3 starts. His first start was at 3/4 of a mile. He won. His second start was at a mile, but it was only a 1-turn mile because it was on a larger racetrack at Aqueduct. Ran very well, won. Then he goes into the Toyota Bluegrass, his first time going around 2 turns, okay? And he faced off against Sierra Leone. He was second to Sierra Leone. Sierra Leone's the second best horse in the Derby, right? According to, all the available information, you would think he's the second best horse. And Sierra Leone got the best of him that day, but that was a horse doing something for the first time. So you feel like Just a Touch, he's got a lot of improvement in front of him, right? Like he's one of those horses that we really don't know where the ceiling is. Now, he would have to improve a lot to get to the likes of Fierceness on his best day. I don't know if anybody's capable of doing that, but is he good enough to make up a length and a half on Sierra Leone the next time they go a couple lengths and they go a mile and a quarter? Sure. I mean, they're definitely within the world of possibility. So and that's what makes the Derby great. None of these horses have gone a mile and a quarter before. It's all their first time going that far. The distance is an issue. A lot of these horses have faced each other individually, but they've never all come together like this. They're coming from all different parts of the country, and they're all 3-year-olds. So they're like college athletes, but horses get better from start to start, right? Where their development is much quicker than a human athlete. So, they're jumping from freshman year to sophomore year to senior year, right? In a matter of like 3 or 4 races. Yeah. And you really don't know who jumps up and like, hey, this is my day. So it is interesting in that respect where I think we know how good Fierceness is. He doesn't need to get better. They need to get better to beat him. I think we know how good Sierra Leone is. He would need to get better. And I'm sure there's some improvement there, but he's had a real steady rise and he's been at a pretty high level for several starts now. I think we kind of know about how well he's going to run, but then these unknown commodities, Just a Touch, we really don't know. You can just rip the ceiling off his potential at this point. He could never get any better than he is right now. He could improve 5 lengths in the Derby. We just don't know. And that unknown is what really plays into the wagering aspect of it when you're trying to figure these things out.
And that's so fascinating to me because you can do all the research you want. And you mentioned like not overthinking it. And I'm going to pick your brain about that in a little bit. But the thing that I was really intrigued by was the pace of the race itself. And that's more than I want to say just the horses, but it's the event too, right? All the money going into it. And what they say, like the best 2 minutes in sports is how they define it, which I think is brilliant on a multitude of ways. But when it comes to the pace and all the money going into it and the fact that it is such a big event, where does that fall into play overall, not just the race itself?
Well, first of all, the grandiosity of the event serves to confuse us all because we put more time into handicapping the Kentucky Derby. There's an old adage in horse racing: study long, study wrong. You'll keep seeing things, right? And perhaps there are things that aren't there. And the hindsight being 20/20 in horse racing is more so than any other sport because, like I said, like baseball, it is a wealth of information. Sabermetrics to me made baseball more interesting, and I think it also opened the sport up to fans that may not have been there before. That gives me hope because horse racing isn't what it once was. 100 years ago it was the biggest sport in the country. I don't think it'll ever be bigger than the NFL, but I do think that with the advent of sports wagering, it can grow a little bit. And much the same way that sabermetrics made baseball more interesting, I think that stat heads and people who really like to dive in, if they just got a flavor of horse racing under their tongue for a moment there, they'd really see how much you can really confuse yourself, which is part of the fun.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, they're 4-legged animals, right? They're going to do whatever the hell they want to do. If they didn't want to run, they wouldn't be running, right? I mean, there are, I can't tell you how many countless horses there are. We see the ones that are good that are run. I can't tell you how many countless horses there are. There's something in horse racing called a morning glory, where these horses will go out in the morning and they will look like the second coming of King Kong. They'll look like Secretariat and Spectacular Bid rolled into one with the soul of Man of War and the tenacity of Citation. And you're just going to think these horses, this is the greatest horse that ever ran. And you put them in a race and they just decide they don't want to do it. And they just go around there and they're just terrible. And I mean, that's a little bit of an exaggeration, but not real. I mean, not as much as you think. There are so many horses that have talent that don't have the mental, I don't want to do it. Or there's horses that when everything goes their way, they're great, but then they face the littlest bit of adversity, they're pea-hearted, and they're like, you know what, I'm not going to do this. You know, I get a little dirt in my face, I'm not running, right? I'm not, you know, like if I don't have everything perfect, you know, like I'm just not going to do this. They got a mind of their own. They're live animals. So as much as we love the data and the information, hey, when a 1,000-pound animal wants to do something, good luck stopping them.
Yeah. And you know how many times I've tried to like talk sabermetrics with like an old school guy? They couldn't care less. They're like,
Right.
that's baseball. You got to slow the game down. And I'm very much like that too. When I played, like when I was playing softball as much as I possibly could, no, I didn't care about the stats. Like I just wasn't hitting and I knew it was a hand issue. So but when it comes to some of these nuances, it's always interesting because you can hear people talk about like the jockey's hand positioning, and you can really go far in depth in these things.
Yeah.
But then you talk about don't overthink it. When did that first come into play for you? Because you could easily go down the rabbit hole of all these things in your mind. How do you simplify it when you're up in your dome piece about it?
So that's a really good question, because I don't know that I ever really simplify it. It's more of, I guess you do so. I think what the real challenge in handicapping is, it's not assessing the information, it's weighing it. What info is most important? So two of the things, like this is like a very like handicapping 101, and this is like one of the first things I learned. So two of the most basic points of handicapping are handicapping class and handicapping pace. So class means the level of competition horses are running against, right? If horses are running at a high competition and they're not running well, but then they drop down to a lower level race, they'll perform better because they're taking on lesser animals, right? And when they're doing sharp, very good races, and then they move up in class, how's that good form going to, you know, work against horses that are better when they move up the class ladder, right? So class is something that's very important. And then pace. And so pace it's the same in horse racing as bicycle racing, any racing. But the essential there are horses that are fast in the early stages and they want to be on the lead throughout, and they play come catch me. I'm going to go out there and run. There are horses that are not as fast in the early stages, but they will try to make their move later in a race. When you go from one surface to another, they run races upside down from each other. So in a turf race, the fastest quarter mile, the fastest eighth mile on the grass is going to be the last eighth of a mile, the last quarter mile. Dirt racing, it's the opposite. The fastest quarter mile of the race is the first quarter mile. So in dirt races, they're essentially slowing down throughout the body of the race. And the horses who are closing, some of them are accelerating, but some of them are just slowing down slower than the others are. So it's the dynamics of pace really come into play, where you're trying to imagine how the race unfolds. I think these horses will be on the lead. I think this horse will be mid-pack. This horse is going to be dead last. When they get to this point, if they go too fast, this horse is going to get first run on them. This horse is going to have to swoop around. Then you're trying to kind of draw it up, right? And figure out in your head, you're trying to picture how the race unfolds. And one of the very first things that I was taught handicapping was a way to find prices is to find a situation where you can get the pace to beat the class. If you can get the pace of the race to undo the class of the race, oftentimes class will get bet more than pace, right? So if there is a horse who is a stone cold front runner and he's got all the class in the world, but he's in a race and there's 3 or 4 horses that are cheap speed that are going to rush out there and soften him up, right? He might have no shot and be a short price. And then you just got to figure out who's going to beat him, right? Exact opposite scenario can be true. You have a horse who's the class of the race. He's a stone cold closer, but he doesn't have pace to run into. He's just going to be spinning his wheels, making up ground, and he's not going to get there. So who can steal this race on the front end? What's a horse at a price that? So those are the very basics of it. Come into the Kentucky Derby. The class question we're trying to figure out, because nobody really knows, right? Where was the strength of this 3-year-old crop? Was it in California, Louisiana, Arkansas, New York, Kentucky, or Florida? Right? Like where? Because they're all running their Derby preps. They're all trying to get there. And so one of the things with the class, like they're all coming out of grade 1 or grade 2 races. They're all coming out of Kentucky Derby preps. So the class question isn't really, it's not like on any given day at the races where you can, judge allowance company versus maidens or winners, etc. Right? This is the highest class, grade 1. They're all grade 1 animals at this point, right? We'll figure out down the line when we look back. Some of these horses go on to do lesser things. Some of them go on to be great. So the class question in this event doesn't really come into question. The pace question, though, really does. And oftentimes when I remember in 2002, my first year watching the Derby at TVG, War Emblem won the Kentucky Derby, went out there on the front end and won it. and it was a huge price. And it was basically one of those scenarios where Victor Espinoza, who was the rider riding for Bob Baffert, got Warrenblum out on the lead, slowed him down, and just went on with it. And no one really thought that was going to happen because the horse had just come into the Baffert barn after winning the Illinois Derby. They bought him privately, and everyone just kind of thought, all right, it's just like kind of a grab bag. He was like 14-1 or 20-1 or something like that. And we see it happen all the time where horses they get loose on the lead and they don't turn around. Now in the Derby, that's a great thing to happen, is having the front end, because everyone's going a mile and a quarter for the first time. So there's question as to who can make it and who can't. A lot of horses, they just don't get a mile and a quarter. They start slowing down so badly at the mile and an eighth that they're never going to be a mile and a quarter horse. It just happens. So if you're on the lead, even if that's not ideally where you're, like your distance, if you're on the lead, at least they have to come get you, right? Like you might not love that mile and a quarter distance, but they got to come get you. So in the Derby, it's always really important to figure out how is the speed going to fare here. The problem with this year's Derby is that the best horse in this field is the fastest horse in this field in Fierceness.
Yeah.
So he may very well be the class of the field. He was a champion at age 2. So last year he was the best of these. He came back, he ran the best race anyone's shown in the Florida Derby. And now he's going into the Kentucky Derby as the favorite. He's got the class and he's the fastest. So the pace and the class are lined up. Matt Bernier, who I work with at FanDuel, he also does, you'll see his coverage on NBC. He does both. He's one of the best handicappers I know. We're looking at it, and we covered the Florida Derby together, and neither one of us like betting the favorite. Neither one of us want to back the chalk, but he's looking at me, he goes, if this horse goes off at 3-1, he's the fastest horse in here. He's the best horse by a mile on his good day. Why are we overthinking this? Like, why are we trying so hard to come up with something just because it's the Derby? If this was any other race on any other day and it wasn't, with the grandiosity of the Kentucky Derby, we would say this horse is a layup. This might be the best 3-1 you can get. So you do have to, at the end of the day, you're right. You got to come back. What's the most important factor in this race, right? There's any handicapper can go and look at a million different angles, and it's an infinite amount of knowledge. But what's going to be the most important when you look at the end of the day, like, okay, what made the difference in that race? It was this. And usually your answers after the race are so much more simple than your reasons before. Right?
Yeah, you can tell the future after the future's already happened. Absolutely. Right. Yeah. And I think I read somewhere Fierceness had the biggest speed figure in 2 decades. Is that true?
Yes. I'm glad you brought up speed figures. So we had the 110 he ran in the Florida Derby is the highest number. That's a buyer speed figure, and those are printed in the Daily Racing Form. Highest buyer speed figure for a Derby prep in however long. I use another product called Thorograph, which is like a buyer. It's a speed figure without getting too wonky, because you can really nerd out on this stuff. And a lot of the really good horse players do nerd out on this stuff, and you kind of have to. And in this event, I certainly am. But with Thorograph, it's a quantification. It's a number like any other speed figure that says how fast they're going. I just think it's a more complete number than anything out there. On Thorograph, it's the opposite. The lower the number, the better. He ran a -3 in the Florida Derby. So that amount of separation, if he runs that number in the Kentucky Derby and everybody else runs their best Thorograph number in the Kentucky Derby, he is going to win by 5 lengths. Like 5 lengths comfortably. So if you want to, and the reason that the buyer speed figures are published in the Daily Racing Form is because Andy Beyer is one of the greatest horse players of all time. He is a legend in this game. And that number that they have published is one of the greatest advancements in racing information in my lifetime or anybody else's lifetime. Thorograph is just a similar type number. I think it's a little more refined and it's a little less available. You have to pay more money for it. So I think it could be more useful in that event. But they're both telling you the same tale right now, is that his optimal effort, his best race, is far and away better than what anybody else in the field can do. So in that instance, if he's that good, why overthink it? I'm going to overthink it. I'm going to spend the next week overthinking it like I've spent the last 4 months overthinking it, because that's my job. And even if it wasn't my job, I'd be doing it anyway. I would just be having to pay admission to get into the racetrack. But that's really, I think at the end of the day, that's going to be the most important thing that we look at.
Yeah, that's so fascinating to me. And I love that you brought up the overthinking, because I feel like when you have money involved and it's just a psychological thing, and then it turns into a bigger thing. It's so fascinating to me. And I know you're nerding out over all this. It's time for me to nerd out with you, your Cubs fandom. Tell me a little bit, give me the down low on why you became a Cubbies fan.
So I grew up in Chicago, and I learned how to read in the Chicago Tribune, following the Cubs in the standings, and on the Daily Racing Form at Arlington Park. So that was kind of how I was brought up. My favorite player of all time is Andre Dawson. He was the home run king when I was 10 years old, something like that. So that is about as visceral a memory as I have. And, I grew up going to games at Wrigley. I actually grew up going to games at Wrigley and Comiskey, because playing Little League in the suburbs of Chicago, they would take the whole Little League to a baseball game. You can't get a whole Little League into Wrigley, right? It's sold out every game. You're just not going to do it. Comiskey, there was always available seats. So we would go to Comiskey once a year. And then my best friend was a White Sox fan. So I would go to 2 games at Comiskey every year. And then I would go to at least 1 or 2 games at Wrigley every year. And so I jumped the fence that shall not be jumped. And everyone tells me, like, oh, you can't like the Sox and the Cubs. I was like, Harry Carey jumped the fence. Sammy Sosa played on both sides. So just leave me alone here. But it was the home run chase in 98. 2 things happened. I went back to Chicago. My brother was living in Wrigleyville. When I was 18, we went to a Cubs game. We missed the first out of the first inning, and the Cubs were down by 5. Like, that's about as Cubs of an experience as you can possibly have.
Yeah.
We were sitting next to Ronnie Woo Woo in the bleachers. And then the home run chase in 98, steroids be darned. It really did bring baseball back.
It's when I fell in love with the sport. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and I understand, like, I get it, but like, we don't know who was on juice and who wasn't, and we're just going by.
We like to pretend like we do, though, Mike. We like to pretend like we do. Yeah.
And to me, like, Sammy Sosa has been just given like one of the rawest steals of anybody, right? Like, A-Rod served 2 suspensions for steroids, and he's on TV, and they even had Pete Rose doing shows on Fox, and they like we've got we forgive these guys over here. Like, Sammy never failed a test. I don't pretend that he's some choir boy, but like, come on, like, he was one of the great, he was one of the great home run hitters of all time. He was one of the greatest Cubs of all time. I was like, I love Sammy Sosa. Like, what? Like, can we get him back in the loop?
I used to practice the Sammy Sosa hop in Little League. I even practiced that. Yeah. Yeah,
it's great. So anyway, I'm a diehard Cubs fan. My son, I have a dog. I don't know if I can get him over here. My dog's name is Rizzo. Right?
Oh, there you go.
Well, it got to be a little bit of a cliche of Cub fans naming their pets Wrigley, and my wife really wanted Wrigley. So I wanted to name it either Hawk or Dawson. Mm-hmm. No one was going for that in the household. Rizzo was the only one that stuck. And Rizzo, obviously, I love Anthony Rizzo, but my son, Declan, who is 17 now, when he was playing Little League, he always wore 44, not for Hammer and Hank, for Anthony Rizzo.
Anthony Rizzo.
And then when he won his Little League championship for his league, he made the last out at first, and he put the ball. I have the video of him putting the ball in his back pocket, like Anthony Rizzo did when they won the World Series in 2016.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, so there's a lot of similarity there.
What would you like to learn from Theo Epstein?
I think the thing that Theo Epstein doesn't get, I don't know if he doesn't get recognized for enough. He just has, and I know I'm not built like this, is why I'll never be a Theo Epstein. There is a relentlessness to the way he goes about doing things. It's the, he's the guy that doesn't have a brake pedal. It's just going to go. And he really was never afraid of giant decisions and making deals. And, when he came into Chicago, blowing it up, I think, speaking of Anthony Rizzo, one of the best deals they ever made was signing him. I remember they signed him as like a 7-year, $54 million deal. And the guy had hit 180 in his short stint in the big leagues. I'm like, what are we doing here?
Yeah.
Might be the greatest contract of life, right?
Mm-hmm.
To lock him up through those years. He took a lot of crap for the Chris Bryant, not bringing him up until June, until the date, so they could get the extra year of control on the back end. That was great. Like, thank God they did that, right? Or they might have a year earlier, they might have signed him to a bad contract, and now the guys broke down in Colorado. I just feel like there's a lack of fear there and a relentlessness in the way he did things, and he was very clearly, all in on sabermetrics at a time where a lot of the league was still reticent. I mean, it was basically the A's and then the Red Sox were the team that made it work the best, and they got those World Series. So he was just not afraid to be a risk taker, not afraid to be kind of, in front of the rest of the league, trying things that other people weren't. And, I just think, and his legacy is going to be, if he's not the greatest executive in the history of Major League Baseball, I don't know who is. It has to be someone from 100 years ago I've never heard of, because what he's done, ending the curse of the Bambino and the curse of the GOAT within 20 years is something that we'll probably never see again.
And you can approach him too. He's very approachable. I'm not just saying that when he's wearing, like just out in the bleachers with the fans, but I think that's that set him apart from other executives as well. I'm a geek for him. That napkin story is one of my absolute favorites. So I'm right there with you. Sticking with the Chicago theme, I know the flu game was an imperative event for you. Do you have your own version of a flu game?
I don't drink anymore, but I had a lot of Irish flus on those Sunday morning Del Mar shows I did. I used to say I was the best broadcaster with the hangover this side of Pat Summerall. But I don't have, I was at the flu game in Salt Lake City. My brother snuck me in. It was my brother Eugene. I'm the youngest of a large family, a lot of older siblings. My brother Eugene, though, is one of you want to talk about the gift of gab and being able to talk. I mean, he, to quote Tommy Boy, he could sell a ketchup popsicle to a woman in white gloves, right? He's just, he could talk a cat off a fish truck. We got into the flu game. We had a friend of ours, Tom Finch, who had 2 press passes, but he was already in the Delta Center. So I'm with my brother. I'm like, I think I'm 19 or 20 at the time. And we drive up. He's got one of those old brick cell phones. It didn't even work. I don't even think it had service. And he had a leather briefcase. And so he had me carrying the briefcase like I was his assistant. And we parked the car like whatever. And we walked right up to, there's this chain link fence. He goes, look for the most police you can see. I'm like, well, what about over there? So we walk up to a chain link fence. He walks up to the cop. He pretends like he's on the phone. And he puts his phone on his chest. And he goes to the cop. He goes, I need to get to the NBC truck like right now. Can you tell me how do? The guy's like, yeah, come on. They open the fence and we walk in. We walk through. He's like, thank you very much. The cop walks us in. We walk into the Delta Center. We come out of the tunnel and onto the floor while the Bulls are in their layup line before the game starts. And he's like, hey, can you see Finch? And Tom is like sitting in the 4th row. And he's like, hey, over here. So we walk over and we get our press passes. They sit down there and he sends me up to the press box. So I'm like some 19-year-old kid. I'm like, how did we just do that? It was the most cool thing I've ever seen in my life. Like we just talked our way into, game 5 of the NBA finals. It was just unbelievable. So that was how I saw the Michael Jordan flu game.
I'm more impressed that you just found your way in than, I mean, not necessarily the flu game, but that's pretty impressive. And you're right. I feel like it's just like an aura you have about yourself where you're like, this guy obviously he's important. Let's let them in. I love that. Before I let you go, a couple more. Tell me about PDJF and why it's important to you.
Oh, thank you for asking me about that. So it's the Permanently Disabled Jockeys Fund. And what we do is we care for the riders who are disabled by virtue of injuries they suffered riding. So paraplegic, quadriplegic, traumatic brain injury, people who are truly disabled, they can't go out. It's one thing if you get injured and you can't perform in your sport anymore, but if you have capacity to get a job as, in some other line of work, that doesn't qualify. It has to be like permanently disabled. We have 60 riders on our rolls, and we provide them with a monthly stipend and support every month because they really don't have anything past us, right? Some of them get disability, some of them collect workman's comp. Workman's comp runs out at a certain point. Disability isn't a lot of money. We really work in concert with that. But it is, it's really an important charity. We're a 501c3. And it's something that I've been involved with for 7-8 years now. I've been on the board, and we just had our biggest fundraiser ever last week. Actually,
I saw that. It was history breaking. Yeah,
we raised $438,000.
Wow.
And it's one of those things where it's unequivocally the only good thing I do. The only 100% good thing I do. Like we're all parents and fathers and sons and whatnot, but it's the one thing I do that. Really, I do feel like I'm giving back, and it's just, it's a reminder, right? Like horse racing is a dangerous game. It really is. And like I said, they're the only athletes that have an ambulance chasing them around the racetrack, right? You see the horses go by, 5 seconds later, you see the ambulance flying by at 40 miles an hour. And when these guys go down, they're traveling at 40 miles an hour on horseback. And when they fall, it's like, people want to know how hard that is. Okay, well, jump out of your car going 40 and see how you do. They're serious falls. And, it's one of those things where I hate to have to say this, but I still have to say it because it is it is the reality. We still don't have a permanent funding mechanism. That's always going to be our goal. We exist on what I call bake sales, right? We just had the telethon last week. We do events like jockey karaoke and jockeys in jeans and these things that are fun and they're great. And we do autograph signings and auctions and all this stuff. But we're constantly needing an influx of cash from individual fundraising events as opposed to having a mechanism. We could learn a lot from thoroughbred aftercare because the thoroughbred aftercare for ex racehorses that go on to they get rehomed and go on to other careers. They do have permanent funding, and they've done a lot of good to take care of the equine athletes. On the back end, we really need to take care of the human athletes as well.
Right.
And it's sad, but true. In our industry, everybody who works in horse racing loves horses, right? Not everyone necessarily loves people. And I think it speaks to the majesty of the animal, but it's easier to garner sympathy for a horse than it is for a fallen horse.
I'm guilty of that. Yeah.
And we treat our horses like kings in the sport. We pour over them with a fine tooth comb, but jockeys don't get paid if they're not riding. So you have a jockey who gets injured and he blows out his ACL and he's like, the doctor says it's going to take 9 months to recover. That guy's going to do everything he can to get back in the saddle and as fast as he can. So if the doctor says 9 months and he feels okay in 3, he's like, I'm riding in 3, right? Because
livelihood.
Yeah, got to do it. They're not athletes like baseball players or football players or where there's salary or guaranteed money or something along those lines. They got to ride every day. That's how they make a living. And so when they lose all their faculties and they can't even go to another job, we don't want to forget about them. Like they're out there riding for their livelihood, but they're riding for our entertainment as well. Horse racing in the entertainment industry, it's a sport. I love, even if I don't have money on a race, I love being at the track. I love, the competition aspect. I can watch horse racing like a regular sport without betting on it just because I'm so into it. I love it so much. So they're out there for our entertainment. We really need to take care of them. So it is very important.
And last couple, where do you see the future of covering this, like coverage of horse racing and betting going?
Well, I'm going to sound a little bit like a company guy. I am a company guy. It's I really do, as a lot of us in horse racing are somewhat evangelical about it because we love the game and we want everyone to love the game. FanDuel being, a behemoth in the sports betting world, really to us that salivate over horse racing, like this could be great for the game. Because like I said, all gamblers, be it, people who are more serious about it and people who are new to it, become price sensitive. They start understanding where opportunities are. And for your entertainment dollars, let's call gambling dollars entertainment dollars. For your entertainment dollars, you don't get as much bang for your buck anywhere else with horse racing. We're doing these crazy promos right now for Derby that I need to spit out there. One of them I thought, I literally thought they were drinking and marketing. I'm like, you guys, you can't just do that. They're giving out, it's a $500 no sweat bet for anything, any kind of horse racing wager when you sign up for an account at FanDuel Racing. So for new account holders, you get it's $500. It used to be we would do these for win bets to get people, okay, just bet to win. But if you want to put together a $500 pick 3 ticket or pick 6 ticket or something like that, it's the same thing. It's really it's a great way, and it's very transparent. What we're trying to do is expose people to this game that we love, right? For me, this is a game that I love. For you, it's baseball. For me, it's horse racing. I want people to experience what I do going to the track every day, or experience what I do watching racing every day. So FanDuel, we started, in this country as TVG back in 1999. We've grown. There's been corporate mergers, takeovers, all sorts of stuff that I really don't ever go to the meetings to understand it. So I'm just kind of guessing at this point how it all unfolds. I'm not a financial analyst, but I will say that the thing that most of us in racing are most excited about is all the initiatives that FanDuel is putting into our coverage of this year. We have a great partnership with the Derby. We're one of the main sponsors of the Kentucky Derby. we are going to have a presence at Churchill Downs we haven't had in almost 20 years. Programming is going to start tomorrow. Today's closing day in Lexington at their track at Keeneland. Tomorrow's opening day at Churchill, and we are all over it. We're going to have almost all of our honored talent are there. We have cameras everywhere. We're going to have a live set. We're going to be in the paddock. We're going to be doing lifestyle stuff. The coverage is wall to wall. I mean, I could show you. I know you, because you do television, when you get like the rundowns, the production sheets, the call sheets, and all this stuff. This is one of those. I grab my iPad. I'm like, whoa, hey,
whoa, yeah.
I mean, it's like the grid is. It's like Beautiful Mind type stuff that the producers are like all put together, and I'm like, and you're trying to like follow your name, like I'm on the set here.
There's like a read for if you take a certain breath in a certain way, like you have to do a read for that. Yeah, I get it. Yeah.
So we're doing a ton of it. I really do encourage everyone to take advantage of the $500 no sweat bet. I keep wanting to call it a free roll because that's what we call it, but it's the wrong verbiage, and I don't want those drunks in marketing beating me up. So I'll call it what they want. But take advantage of that. But really, if you can't make it to the Derby, and it's like going to the Super Bowl, it's an expensive event to go to. It's a bucket list thing that everyone should do once. But the coverage we have on FanDuel is going to be awesome. The FanDuel TV coverage, our social coverage, the stuff on the OTT app is just going to be. It's so expansive that I could never go in a million years into detail into everything that we're doing. But it's going to be awesome, and all of us are going to be there. I get there Thursday. The people doing the real work that are going to be there in the mornings and all that stuff, they're getting there tomorrow, and it's going to be 100 miles an hour from the word go, and it's going to be awesome. So I really do think that we're going to show people something special this year. Of course, NBC, they have the big race. We're going to be steering coverage when they go live on NBC and their coverage. We're going to steer people over there. We can't obviously show the Kentucky Derby in its entirety when it's on NBC. And there's it's not just the Derby. There's tons of stakes races Friday and Saturday. Friday is Oaks Day. It's the 3-year-old fillies instead of the Colts and Geldings. And there's great races on every division coming up. And we're going to bring you a lot of that. But it's going to be. I haven't been this excited to go to a Derby almost ever.
Yeah, I mean, I can hear
that was pretty amazing.
I can hear the passion in your voice.
It's real.
It's great.
It's real. Like yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, well, I'm looking forward to it. And thanks so much for your time. This is a blast. I appreciate it, Mike.
No, thank you so much for having me. I'm really happy I got a chance to do this, and I really appreciate you guys reaching out.
Of course. That was my chat with Mike Joyce. I told you it was really fun, energetic. He's so passionate about what he does. And I think that that's why he has a job and has had jobs for as long as he has in this space. And I'm always curious about how he approaches this atmosphere, because horse racing and the betting aspect of it all, it's always been kind of interesting to me, but I love how passionate he was in a space that I'm still trying to get to used to as well. So make sure you're following him on all of his coverage. And thanks so much for tuning into this episode. I hope you learned something, because I learned a lot. I have a full notepad of all the things that I learned from Mike. So Mike, thanks for stopping by. Make sure you are liking and subscribing everything from this episode, our podcast, wherever you can get on those platforms, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, search Awful Announcing. For Philip, this is Jess Kleinschmidt, and we'll see you next time.
Want even more short and to the point? Follow Jessica at KleinschmidtJD and head over to thecomeback.com and awfulannouncing.com.